This morning we're going to show you how to take a model that you created with CabWriter and SketchUp and create all of the production and shop drawings that you need to build your model. Most of what we will do will be automated, but there are some things that the designer has to do manually. And those will include things like setting up the scenes and annotating and dimensioning their drawings. But I'm going to take you through the types of automated documents that CabWriter will produce and show you how to set up for it and how to produce them. And so let's get started. I have a few slides that I want to use, and we'll go through them rather quickly, but I just want to make sure that you've got a full picture of sort of the process. And then we'll get on to actually doing it so you can see on the screen how we do it in real time. First of all, let's talk about the CabWriter project documents that you can create. The first one is the door and draw reports. Most cabinet makers, especially professional cabinet makers, purchase their doors and draws from a third party. And so one report is called the Door and Draw Report, and it's going to be a report that shows you all the purchased parts. And this includes door fronts, draw boxes, and even the slides that you use. We assume that you use 2 slides per box or a pair of slides. CabWriter will produce a spreadsheet compatible cut list. In reality, what it is a CSV file, which can be read into any spreadsheet or any CSV compatible program or application. CabWriter will also produce a Cutlass Plus FX CWX file. The CWX file is a file extension that's specific to CabWriter and Cutlass Plus FX. And it allows you to just click on the file and it'll automatically open up Cutlass Plus FX and assign all of the columns to the right places in Cutlass Plus FX. CabWriter also produces a Cutlass Plus FX compatible CWX file with per component DXF. This way, Cutlass Plus can optimize your sheets using the outlines of each component or part. And then it replaces the per component DXF with the outlines in Cutlass Plus. So then you can export your DXF files, sheet formatted DXF files from Cutlass Plus FX. If you use a third-party application like Cut2D Pro, CabWriter can produce a DXF file by material name and thickness, which can be read directly into an application such as Cut2D Pro. So these are the reports that we will generate today, and I will take you through them in more detail, but first I want to show you how to set up for these reports. To set up or prepare for these project documents, we need to create a number of scenes. The first one is the perspective scenes that you need for your layout model. Perspective scenes are scenes like northeast view, southeast view, southwest view, northwest view, or any other view that you want to include that you might show a client or just render for yourself to give you a good view of what the finished project will look like. Only these scenes will be rendered in camera perspective. All future scenes will be rendered in parallel projection. That's very important. So let's take a look at what these rendered perspective scenes look like. Here's the northwest perspective. Notice it's in perspective view, as are the northeast, the southeast, and southwest. Now, if you're really diligent and if you're a professional and you really want to make things look beautiful for your client, you can actually texture these with wood grain and things like that. But these are the perspective scenes. Next, we're going to create a scene that has only purchased parts. And the purchased parts only include things that are purchased from a third party, for instance, door and drawer fronts and boxes. Let's take a look at that. This is a purchased parts scene. If I look at the layers over here, you'll notice the only layers in this scene that are visible are the base doors, base drawer boxes, base drawer fronts, upper doors, upper drawer boxes, and upper drawer fronts. Typically, you will not have upper drawer fronts and upper drawer boxes, but in this design, we did have 3 of them right here. These are put on their own views so that when we create the purchased parts report, it will know what to include. And it won't include other things such as base boxes or trim or things like that, face frames. Okay, so what's the next scene we want to look at? The next scene we want to produce is a cut list scene. And the cut list scene will include only parts that are to be on the cut list. Well, obviously, purchased parts aren't going to be on the cut list. So let's take a look at what a cut list scene might look like. Notice that the door and drawer fronts were on the purchased parts scene. So they're not on the cut list scene. The cut list wants to include only those things we're going to build in our own shop, not third-party purchased parts. So we've left those, the doors, drawer boxes, drawer fronts, left those out of this scene. These are just things that we want to, produce in our shop. Let's see what the next scene is. The next scene is a DXF scene. And this is going to include all of the sheet good parts to be cut on a CNC. And nothing but sheet good parts. Now, there may be other parts included. But if they're not sheet goods, they will not be included in the DXF report. So let's talk about this one a little bit. In this case, what I did was I only included the base boxes, upper boxes, and I shouldn't have included upper drawer boxes. That's a mistake. I'm going to get rid of it right now. And I'll update that scene. So basically these are just the boxes. The 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch material. What if I weren't going to purchase my drawer fronts and door fronts from a third party, but only the boxes? Maybe I want to make the drawer fronts and door fronts myself, and in that case I might want to cut the panels for those frame and panel doors on the CNC. Well, in that case what I would do is I would include the base doors and the base drawer fronts, the upper doors and the upper drawer fronts. And now when I produce my DXF report, it will take all of the sheet goods in here. Now, it won't include the face frames, or the frames in the frames and panels. It'll only include the panels because the panels are sheet goods. It won't include the other parts. It knows not to include parts that aren't sheet goods. So in that way I can produce and cut all of my panels for my doors and drawers in my shop if I wanted to. But in this project we're not going to do that. We're going to leave those out. So lastly, Lastly, we want to create a scene that's going to be used for all of our elevation and plan views. It's just a base scene that will have everything in it that we want included in our plan views and our elevation views. This scene is only intended for the purposes of making the creation of those other plan view and elevation views easy. When we're done and those are created, we can delete this scene. But let's just see what it looks like. In this scene, I've included all of the CabWriter components, and those include the walls. I don't include things like appliances. I don't include things like the crown molding in this drawing. Just all of the CabWriter parts. Because when I do my sections, I want those included, including the walls. The sections will include the walls. And you'll see as we go along that we're going to use this scene a lot. It's the base scene we're going to generate everything else from. So okay, now that we have a few rules that I want to go over, and then we're ready to start actually doing the sectioning and creating reports. There are a few rules that you have to follow so that CabWriter can produce the sections that we want to produce, both the plan views and the elevations. The first rule is that the entire SketchUp model must be in the positive axis space. That is, it has to be in the positive red, green, and blue quadrant of 3D space. That's very important. Plan views must be parallel to the red and green plane. In other words, all plan views are looking from the top down. Elevation views must be orthogonal to either the red or green axis. We can't have section planes, at the moment at least, that are not orthogonal, that are at an angle to one of those axes. That restriction might be removed in a future version, but not right now. Non-orthogonal elevations can be created if they don't include a section cut. So for instance, if you have a diagonal corner cabinet and you want a view of the door only of the diagonal corner cabinet, you can create that view provided you don't do a section cut. If you do a section cut, all bets are off. Okay, with that, we're ready to actually start creating our reports and doing our sections. Before we begin creating section scenes, the first thing we want to do is associate our hatches with the materials we're using in the model. We do that with the Assign Hatches tool, and that associates materials to a hatch. First thing it does when you open it up for the first time is it looks in your model and collects all of the material types and material names, and then asks you to assign a hatch to each of those material type, material name combinations. Now, before I do anything, notice that this button says cancel. And it does what you would think it would do. If you hit it while it says cancel, it will just stop at that point. It will not save anything you've done and close the dialog box. But it has another purpose, as you'll see as we go along. We can also stop at any time while we're assigning materials. Suppose, for instance, that we have 9 different types of materials that we need to assign hatches to, and we get through 4 of them, and we decide we want to come back and finish it later. We can say save partial assignments and close. And when you come back, those partial assignments will have been saved, and you can continue to complete the assignments. So I'm going to begin the assignments and show you what happens here. First of all, it says this is rough material. And over here it says maple. So I'm going to assign a hatch to rough material maple. Now through experience, I know what hatches I kind of want to assign. So I'll use this drop-down box. Now notice this is the number of materials that CabWriter puts in your materials folder, in your materials dialog box. And these are hatches that work well by our experience and we've included in CabWriter. So for the rough lumber maple, I'm going to assign brick common face. And also through experience, I know that I want to scale it to about 3/4 size. Now, this rotation and this scale parameters only apply to layout drawings. They do not apply to SketchUp hatching. And I'll show you later how to effectively scale in SketchUp hatching. Okay, so for my rough lumber, I've taken care of maple. Let's see if there's any more, and there's not. There's only maple. So now let me go to sheet goods. And for sheet good maple plywood, I'm going to use the honeycomb. And I'm going to rotate it 45 degrees, and I'm going to scale it to 50%. And so now, notice I don't have to hit any next keys. I'm just going to go to the next type of material, which is maple pre-finished. And for that, I'm going to choose the aluminum. And I'll leave the rotation and scale just the way it is. For shop plywood, I'll use black dots. And I'll leave this alone for the moment. And now that's all there is. I've got all of the sheet goods. Let's see if there's anything else. There's walls. And walls I can assign. For walls I'm going to assign concrete masonry. And also leave the rotation and scaling alone. Notice once I did that last assignment that the cancel button turned to done. That simply means, it's simply telling me that I've now assigned a material to every single, a hatch to every single type of material name. Let me say that again. I've assigned a hatch to every combination of material type, material name. And once I've done that, this will turn to done. And so at this point, I can click this. It'll no longer behave like a cancel button, but rather a save button. And it's also just a flag to let me know that I've gone through everything. So I'm going to say done. Notice if I come back to it, it says done. And again, done only means that I've assigned a hatch to each material type, material name combination at least once. I can go back and change these if I'd like, but at the moment, that's what I'm going to do. Now here's something I'd like to say about associating materials to hatches. When you've done it, create one scene and thoroughly examine that scene and see if you like the hatches you assigned. You may have to go in SketchUp, you may have to go and scale them, or even in LayOut, you might want to look at them and say and ask, do you like it? Because if you create a number of scenes, that this association is used on, and you change one thing. For instance, if I were to change the material type for my rough lumber from brick common face to something else, it's likely that rough lumber appears in a lot of different section cuts. And so now I'll have to go back and recreate all of those section cuts. So experiment with one section cut first and make sure you like all of the associations instead of having to go back later and change them all. Okay, so now I'm done. Now I can begin sectioning. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get elevation views for this entire kitchen. And I can start by just simply adding a section cut using the Display Section Planes tool. I'm sorry, the Section Plane tool. In SketchUp 2018, it asks you if you want to assign a name. I'm just going to use the name it assigns. It doesn't matter. I can start with 1. And I'm going to do the north view first. This is my north view. I believe that's my north. And what I want to do is just use the move tool to place this section wherever I want it. And that looks good enough to me. So once I've done that, I can then go to the Draw menu, CabWriter, Create Section from Section Plane, and I've got some options. It says, do I want to use a selected scene name? No, I'm going to create a new scene name. But if I did, notice that it will use the base layout name, which is the currently selected scene. But I don't want that name. I'm going to call this North Elevation. And I want to include everything that's in this scene in the section cut. So I chose all, and I say OK. And there we go. Notice that it's created this north elevation scene. It's oriented looking directly at it. In other words, it's oriented parallel to the screen. And notice all the sections are there. So now I can examine these and see if I like them. They're not bad. I might want to make the section dots a little closer together. The wall seems to be fine. The plywoods seem to be fine. This is plywood down here too. And let's see. Have I cut through any hardwoods? I have. That's my aluminum. That looks pretty good. And the honeycomb is okay. I can make it a little smaller, but it looks okay. Let me just experiment with one. These dots. And to do that, I will need to view the materials dialog box. And I need to go to the in-house materials. Whoops, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Materials, in-house. I'll go to this one. And I'll edit it. Notice down here it says 1 inch, 1 inch. Well, if I want these dots to be closer together, I probably want to change this. Let me just try a 1/2 inch. All right, notice my dots are now closer together, and that probably looks better. And so now what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to my hatch association table. And I'm going to go to sheet goods, shop plywood. That was black dots. I'm going to change this to a half. That way when I send my hatches to layout, they'll look the same in layout as they do here. And I'll say done. Okay, so let's say now I've thoroughly examined all my hatches and I like them. I'm never going to change them. That's good. So now what I can do is I can go back to my base layout again. Create another section. I thought this would automatically update to 2, but it's not. I'll remember to do that. Place that, but it doesn't matter. I don't use that for anything. So what's my next one? Well, this is north. This is west, so I'll do west next. I'll select this and place it. I'm not going to be real fussy about this. This is a tutorial. I'm not going to actually build from these drawings. But I'll select a view that looks about right. And I'll say, draw, CabWriter, create section from section plane. And I'm going to call this one west elevation. Okay, so now I have my west elevation and I have my north elevation. And I'm going to continue to do this for the south and east. So let me go back to my base layout. And if that's north, this would be south. So here's what I'm going to do. For the south one, the only thing of interest in the south one really is the island. So I'll rotate this around. And change this to 3. Move it into place. That's pretty good, I suppose. Notice that this section cut is facing in this direction. This grayed out section cut was my north section plane. This one pointing to the right was my west section plane. So you can see all the section planes here. And I'll go to Draw, CabWriter, Create Section from Section Plane. And this one I'm going to call South, South Elevation. And again, I want everything in there. And again, everything's hatched, looking good. So my last elevation, well, for the moment anyway, my last elevation, I'll go back to my base layout. And this one wants to be this wall. And I need to place that wherever I want it. I'll do it right there. And again, I go to CabWriter, create section from section plane, and this is my east elevation. Okay, so far I have my north, west, south, east elevation. Now I want to do a plan view for the lowers. This one's very similar. This is going to be 5, I guess. Notice, by the way, down here that you can ignore this and it'll increment for you. But because it started out with 12, I'm going ahead and putting the correct numbers in. You may never use this, but in case you do, you want it to be numbered correctly. So I'll put this on the floor. This one we got to be a little more careful how we choose it, and you might want to zoom in because you don't want to get, you want to try and stay away from sectioning shelf holes. So you want to get between shelf holes if you can. And I'll go with that. I'm going to call this base plan. And there we go. Now I have my base plan. And again, it's got my hatches. And I'll go back now to my base layout, and I will add this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I need to choose a place here, and that's probably okay. I think that gets everything I want. And so now I'm going to create a section from a section plane, and I'll call this upper plan. Now, this is a good time to mention something. Notice what's happened here. If I look at this like this, notice this is the section cut. It's hatched. And so if you look at layers, what you'll see here is a Z upper layer, Z upper plan layer, and it's checked. If I uncheck it, notice I've got a section cut, but you can actually see inside. Pretty ugly. In fact, if you look at this from the top, you'll see all the holes and everything else. That's not what you want. So, in fact, you want this section cut. But what you might not want is you might not want in this view, you might not want the lower cabinet showing. So what you can do if you want is you can take out all the upper or I'm sorry, all the base layers. And you might take out the countertops and all of that. And so now you've got just the uppers showing. And if you like that, then you simply go to this plan and do an update on this scene, on this upper plan scene. I'm going to leave this in. Well, let me just do that. I'm going to leave it the way it was created for the moment. And now I probably want to create, oh, there it is, base layout. And probably the last scene I want to create, well, actually it's not the last scene because I want to show you something else. This is 7. I'm going to be very careful about this. In fact, I'm going to zoom in a lot. Make sure I get 7 here. I'm going to select 7. Zoom in a lot and move it up. I want to make sure I get, there we go. I wanted to get this sectioned. So now I can go to Draw, CabWriter, create section from section plane. I'm going to call this ladder base. Plan. And there we go. Now we got the ladder bases sectioned. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to save this. Okay. Up until now, we've been creating all of our scenes by sectioning all of the parts that are shown in the base layout. So, for instance, what we did for the base plan here, this one right here, was we selected that section, the base plan scene, and did a section cut across all of the components in this and created the base plan. Now what we want to do is there are times when you only want certain things in the sectioning. For instance, if I go back to my base layout, let's say I want a section cut with only this cabinet in it. So what I'll do is I'll say CabWriter, select cabinet, and I'm going to go to my active cuts. I'm going to use the same active cut for this cabinet that I used in the base plan. So I'm going to use the control key with the select tool to add a plus sign to the cursor, and then select that and go to camera, or draw rather, CabWriter, section cut from section plane, and this I'll call diagonal let me spell it right, cabinet plan. And I'm going to choose this radio button. Up until now I've been choosing this, but now I'm choosing this by selection, because what I'm doing is I only want a section plan with that cabinet in it. So I say OK. And there we go. Now what I can do is move this, make it bigger, update my diagonal, and there we go. All right, so I can do that for any single cabinet or any single part if I just want one part. So that's the by selection. There's times also when you want to create sections by layer. So for instance, if I go back to this time what I want to do is say that I want a section cut that for some reason has only my base boxes and my base face frames. No doors and drawers. So I'll choose those two layers only and go to let me choose this section right here. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to say by layer, and I'll call this base boxes and face frame. And it's only going to be a section cut by layer. And there you go. Notice that's different than the base plan. So that's all of the ways that you can create section cuts in CabWriter. Now, I want to show you how to do a little editing here. I want to go back to, let's see. Let's do the north elevation. Notice when I did the north elevation, and let me look at it this way. Notice when I did the north elevation, I stopped my section before these cabinets and before these cabinets. I got the section of all the base cabinets, but I didn't get the section of all of the upper cabinets. So let's say I want to change that. Well, one of the things I can do is I can take the active cut that was used for that, and let me move it. Now I've got pretty much everything in there. And I'll go back to Draw, CabWriter, Section from Section Plane. Go back to All. And I want to use my north elevation name. And I say OK. It says the section name already exists. Choose Yes to replace the existing section mask. Choose No to keep the existing section mask and add a new section mask active cut. Choose Cancel to exit. Well, I'm going to say yes. And there we go. Now notice that view has the entire section. I can do the same thing to the other ones, but I'm not going to bother doing all of that. Notice I stopped short here. But if I wanted to, I could simply do the same thing. Choose that cut. Move it over until like, there we go. And Draw, CabWriter, Sections from Section Plane, All. I want to redo that scene, so I'll do that and say yes. And there we go. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do. That's all I'm going to show you how to do today. This is a two-part video. In part 2, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to take all of these scenes up here, put them in LayOut, and section in layout. And then finally, we'll produce all of the other documents that we need for documenting our project. Until then, have a good day.